The biting wind whipped across the vast Montana ranch, carrying with it the scent of pine and a chilling sense of unease. For days, a young foal had been missing, not just a little lost, but utterly gone. His mother, a strong mare named Starlight, paced the fence line, her whinnies growing more desperate with each passing hour. The rancher, a weathered man named Jed, felt the knot in his stomach tighten. He'd scoured every creek bed, every hidden draw, every patch of sagebrush. Nothing. It was as if the earth had swallowed the little colt whole. But then a flicker of movement on the distant ridge caught his eye. The foal. And he was heading back, not towards the safety of the barn, but towards that same empty patch of land he'd been drawn to for days. What was pulling the little one? What secret was hidden in that desolate spot? Jed knew he had to find out before the answer became a tragedy. This wasn't just a search for a lost animal. It was a race against time, a battle against the vast, unforgiving wilderness, and a mystery that was unfolding one determined trot at a time. Jed adjusted his hat, the brim shielding his eyes from the relentless glare of the sun, and spurred his horse, Buck, into a steady rhythm. He had a feeling this day would be different. He had a feeling this day the truth would finally be revealed. The search had begun with a gnawing fear, a primal instinct that something was terribly wrong. Jed, a man whose life was etched into the very soil of this ranch, understood the language of the land. He knew when a subtle shift in the wind carried a scent of danger, or when the silence in the pasture was too profound, too unnatural. The night the foal, barely a week old, had vanished from the protected corral. A cold dread had settled over him like a shroud. He had checked the latches himself, ensuring they were secure, a routine he performed every night without fail. Yet, here he was, standing in the pre-dawn chill, the corral empty, save for the frantic pacing of Starlight, his prize mare. Her whinnies were not the usual comforting sounds of a content animal. They were raw, guttural cries of pure maternal agony, echoes of a primal fear that resonated deep within Jed's own chest. He had grabbed his trusty flashlight, its beam cutting a stark, white swath through the inky blackness of the night, his boots crunching on frost-hardened earth. He'd called the foal's name, a name Jed had chosen with care, for the way the colt's dappled coat seemed to shimmer under the moonlight, like a celestial visitor. Comet. But Comet was nowhere to be found. Each call was met only by the vast indifferent silence of the Montana wilderness, a silence that amplified Jed's growing panic. The next morning the sun rose on a situation that had escalated from concerning to dire. The initial hope that Comet had simply wandered off to explore a nearby patch of clover had long since evaporated. Jed knew he had to conduct a more thorough, systematic sweep of the ranch. He saddled his most reliable horse, a sturdy, intelligent gelding named Buck, whose calm demeanor and unwavering loyalty were a comfort in times of crisis. Together, they began their methodical exploration. They checked the far pastures, the sprawling expanses where herds of cattle grazed peacefully. Oblivious to the drama unfolding at the heart of the ranch, they ventured into the dense woods bordering the north side, a place of shadows and whispering leaves, where visibility was limited and every rustle of undergrowth could be a false alarm, or worse. Jed even led Buck towards the treacherous rocky outcrops that bordered the western edge of the property, a place few dared to explore, a place of hidden ledges and steep drops. He knew the inherent dangers that lurked out here, the sudden, unpredictable blizzards that could descend with terrifying speed, the hidden ravines that could swallow an unwary animal, the ever-present threat of predatory wildlife, coyotes, mountain lions, even the occasional bear. Every hour that passed without a sign of Comet felt like another nail being hammered into a coffin Jed refused to acknowledge, refused to even contemplate. Starlight remained a constant mournful presence, her liquid brown eyes fixed on the horizon, a silent, eloquent testament to Jed's own mounting desperation. He kept scanning the landscape, his gaze sharp and unblinking, searching for any disturbance, any misplaced stone, any track that spoke of the missing colt. He was looking for a miracle, a sign, anything to break the oppressive silence and bring his lost foal home. As the hours stretched into days, Jed's concern deepened into a grim determination. He couldn't do this alone. The ranch was vast, the terrain unforgiving, and the chances of finding a small, vulnerable foal dwindled with each passing sunset. He made a difficult decision. He needed help. Jed picked up the phone, his fingers dialing numbers he knew by heart, numbers of neighboring ranchers, men and women who understood the unwritten code of the land, the unspoken bond that tied them all together. Within a few hours, a small but dedicated search party began to assemble at the ranch headquarters. There was Old Man Hemlock, whose knowledge of the local terrain was legendary, his weathered face a road map of a life lived outdoors. There was Sarah Jenkins, a young woman with an uncanny ability to read animal behavior, her gentle approach often yielding results where brute force failed. And there were others, a handful of his own ranch hands, their faces etched with concern and a shared sense of purpose. They fanned out across the sprawling property, their horses kicking up dust, their voices a chorus of calls, each one a plea into the indifferent wilderness. Jed watched them go, a lump forming in his throat. It was a community united by the simple, profound need to bring a lost creature home, a small island of humanity against the immense backdrop of nature. But still, no comet, no sign. The vastness of the land seemed to mock their efforts, swallowing up their hopes with each passing fruitless hour. Jed's own hope, which had been flickering like a candle in a storm, began to fray, thread by thread, like an old rope tested beyond its limits. He started to consider the unthinkable, the grim possibilities that haunted his waking hours and stalked his dreams. The image of the tiny foal, alone and exposed to the elements, to the predators, to the sheer indifference of the wild, was a constant agonizing torment. Then, on the third morning, just as Jed was beginning to feel the icy grip of despair tighten around his heart, a shout echoed across the valley, a sound that pierced the heavy silence like a ray of sunlight. It was young Billy, one of his most energetic hands, his voice cracking with a mixture of pure elation and profound relief. Jed's heart leapt into his throat, a frantic flutter of pure adrenaline. He didn't need to ask. He spurred Buck into a gallop, the powerful horse responding instantly to the urgency in his rider's command. He found Billy standing near the eastern fence, his hand outstretched, his whole body vibrating with excitement. And there, silhouetted against the pale, ethereal glow of the dawn sky, was Comet. The foal was alive. He was thin, his ribs showing starkly beneath his dappled coat, a testament to his ordeal. But he was moving. Jed's relief was so profound, so overwhelming, it nearly buckled his knees. He let out a shaky breath, tears welling in his eyes. Starlight, sensing her son's presence, her maternal senses honed to an almost supernatural degree, let out a powerful, joyous whinny that seemed to vibrate through the very air, a sound of pure, unadulterated maternal joy. She broke into a run, her powerful legs churning across the pasture, heading straight for her lost baby. Her entire being focused on this single, precious reunion. But as Jed watched, his relief tinged with a sudden, sharp confusion, a new puzzle began to unfold, a puzzle far stranger than a simple lost foal. Comet, after a brief, almost startled moment of recognition at the sight and sound of his approaching mother, did not run to her, he did not nuzzle her flank or seek the comfort of her warmth. Instead, the little foal, after pausing only for a fleeting second, turned and began to trot away from her, back towards the desolate rocky hills on the far edge of the ranch. It was a place Jed rarely went, a place of scrubby bushes, scattered boulders, and little else, a place that held no obvious appeal for a young, vulnerable animal seeking safety and sustenance. Jed stared, his brow furrowed in disbelief. Why would the foal, after surviving days alone in the wilderness, after being found by his frantic mother, turn away from her, away from the safety of the barn, and head towards that empty, inhospitable land. Starlight followed, her whinnies now laced with confusion and a renewed sense of panic. She tried to herd Comet back, nudging him gently with her head, her body blocking his path, but the foal seemed determined, his small legs carrying him with surprising speed and an unwavering focus towards the desolate ridge. It was as if he were being pulled by an invisible thread, a force Jed could not comprehend. Jed called out, his voice strained, tinged with a mixture of authority and bewilderment. "Comet! Come here! Boy! Get back here!" He urged Buck forward, his own confusion quickly morphing into a prickle of concern that quickly escalated to full-blown worry. This wasn't just a lost foal finding his way home. This was something else entirely. This was a behavior Jed couldn't understand, a deviation from every instinct he knew about young horses. He'd seen foals get spooked, wander off in a moment of panic, get confused by predators or harsh weather, and eventually find their way back, often in a weakened state. But this felt different. It was a deliberate, almost insistent direction, a clear and unwavering purpose in the foal's movements. Comet kept moving, his head held high, his gaze fixed intently on something Jed couldn't see, something beyond the immediate landscape. He reached the base of the ridge and, to Jed's astonishment, began to climb, picking his way sure-footedly over the loose scree and jagged rocks, his small hooves finding purchase where it seemed impossible. Jed followed, slower now, urging Buck with gentle commands, his focus entirely on the small, determined figure ahead. He had to see where the foal was going. What was drawing him to this forgotten corner of his land with such unwavering focus? The answer, Jed felt with a growing certainty, was out there, waiting for him on that barren, windswept ridge. He could feel it in the air, a sense of impending revelation. As they ascended the ridge, the wind grew stronger, whistling a mournful tune through the scattered rocks, a sound that seemed to carry whispers of ancient secrets. The landscape was stark and unforgiving, a panorama of rugged beauty that Jed knew intimately. Yet it held an eerie quality he hadn't noticed before. Twisted junipers, ancient sentinels of the high plains, clung to impossible crevices, their branches gnarled and contorted by years of harsh weather, their forms like sculptures carved by the wind itself. Jed scanned the ground, his experienced eyes searching for any sign of what Comet might be following. What invisible beacon was guiding his determined path? Was it a scent, carried on the strengthening breeze, a scent too faint for Jed's human nose to detect? Was it a sound, a distant cry or whimper that only a foal's sensitive ears could discern? Or was it a visual cue, a subtle disturbance in the earth, a pattern of disturbed dust, a broken twig? Something invisible to Jed's human eyes, but glaringly obvious to a creature of the wild. He'd found plenty of lost animals in his time, guided by tracks, by instinct, by sheer luck. But never had he encountered a case with such a peculiar, singular purpose, such an unwavering, inexplicable direction. He watched Comet's hindquarters disappear and reappear between the looming boulders, a small, determined silhouette against the vast, indifferent canvas of the sky. Starlight was still nearby, her calls less frantic now, more of a low, questioning murmur, her own maternal instincts clashing with her son's strange insistence. She seemed as perplexed as Jed, her intelligent eyes reflecting a deep maternal concern. Jed kept his gaze fixed on Comet, pushing Buck forward with steady, reassuring pats. He knew he was close. He could feel it in the tightening in his chest, in the heightened sense of anticipation that seemed to hum in the air. The foal had stopped. Jed crested the last rise, his breath catching in his throat. He saw Comet standing still, his head lowered, his small body slightly trembling, not from fear, but from a quiet intensity. He was looking down, his gaze fixed on a narrow crevice between two massive, ancient boulders that seemed to have been thrust from the earth eons ago. Jed dismounted, his boots crunching on the loose shale and scree that littered the ground, the sound unnervingly loud in the sudden stillness. He approached cautiously, his eyes still fixed on the foal, expecting him to spook, to bolt, to react to his presence. But Comet didn't spook. He didn't even look up. He just stood there, a picture of focused, silent attention, his entire being radiating an almost palpable sense of purpose. Jed moved to Comet's side, his large hand resting gently on the foal's warm, trembling flank. The little colt leaned into his touch for a fleeting moment, a flicker of connection, a silent acknowledgement of his rescuer, before returning his gaze, his attention undeterred, to the dark crevice. Jed followed the foal's unwavering gaze, his own eyes squinting, trying to penetrate the deep shadows that lay within the rocky cleft. At first, he saw nothing but the interplay of light and shadow, the rough texture of the ancient stone. The crevice was deep, dark, and appeared to lead into the very heart of the ridge, a place that seemed to hold its secrets tightly. Then, as his eyes adjusted to the dim light, Jed saw it. A faint, almost imperceptible movement within the deepest shadows. A small, curled shape. He knelt down, his heart beginning to pound with a new kind of intensity, trying to make out the details. It was a tiny creature, its fur matted and dusty, its breathing shallow and ragged. It was another foal. But this foal was different. It was much smaller, much weaker, and appeared to be trapped, its fragile leg caught in a narrow part of the crevice, wedged between two unyielding stones. It was too small to be Comet's sibling, perhaps a stray that had somehow wandered onto the property and found itself in this dire, life-threatening predicament, and Comet, somehow, by some miracle of instinct and determination, had found it. The realization hit Jed with the force of a physical blow. The pieces of the puzzle clicked into place with a sudden, startling clarity. Comet hadn't been lost. He hadn't been wandering aimlessly, driven by hunger or fear. He had been on a mission for days, while Jed and his neighbors had scoured every obvious direction, every familiar pasture, every accessible water source. Comet had been drawn, with an almost supernatural pull, to this very spot. He had likely heard the faint cries of the trapped foal, a sound of distress that had resonated with his own young, developing sense of empathy. He had found a way out of the corral, a path only a determined, resourceful youngster could navigate, and he had made his way here, to this hidden place. He had tried to get close, to help, but the crevice was too small, too narrow for him to reach the trapped creature. He had run back towards the ranch, not in surrender, but in a desperate, intelligent attempt to lead anyone back to the struggling animal, and each time he had escaped, each time he had been found, his instinct, his unwavering focus, had been to return to this spot, to the sound of the struggling, helpless creature. Jed looked at Comet, who stood patiently beside him, a picture of quiet dignity. A swell of pride and awe washed over him, so profound it brought tears to his eyes. The little colt, barely weaned, had shown incredible bravery, an intelligence and a sense of compassion that belied his age and size. He hadn't given up. He had known, in his own way, that help was needed, and he had tried, with all his might, to guide them. Jed gently eased Comet aside, his movements slow and deliberate so as not to alarm the trapped foal, whose shallow breaths were now faintly visible in the dim light. He reached into the crevice, his fingers brushing against soft, trembling fur. The trapped foal flinched, a tiny piteous whimper escaping its throat. Jed spoke in a low, soothing voice, his words a soft murmur, trying to convey reassurance, to let the small creature know it was no longer alone. He carefully worked to free the small leg, which was wedged tightly between two unyielding stones, its delicate bone trapped in a vice-like grip. The rock was rough against his skin, and the space was so confined he could barely get his hand in, his fingers scraping against the sharp edges. He could feel the foal's fear, its pain, radiating in tiny shivers. It was a mirror of the fear he had felt when he first realized Comet was missing, the same desperate hope for rescue. He understood now, completely. Comet hadn't been running to a spot. He'd been running for a spot, for a creature trapped within it. He had sensed the distress, the danger, and his young heart had driven him to act. He had become a beacon of hope for another, lost and alone in the vast wilderness. The realization brought a warmth to Jed that chased away the lingering chill of the past few days, a profound sense of connection and purpose. It wasn't just about finding a lost foal. It was about understanding the profound interconnectedness of life on the ranch, the unspoken bonds that tied them all together, the quiet acts of courage that unfolded in the heart of nature. Jed continued his careful work, his focus absolute, the fate of the tiny filly resting in his hands. The trapped foal let out another soft whimper, and Jed felt a surge of determination. He couldn't fail now. He couldn't let this small life be lost. He worked patiently, his movements precise, trying to find the right angle, the precise amount of pressure needed to release the trapped limb without causing further injury. He thought of Comet, standing patiently beside him, his quiet presence a silent testament to the importance of this rescue. The little colt, the one Jed had feared was gone forever, was now the unlikely hero, the steadfast guide who had led him to this critical moment. Jed's respect for Comet deepened with every passing second. He was more than just a foal. He was a creature of remarkable courage and profound compassion. Finally, with a gentle, calculated tug, the trapped foal's leg slipped free. It was scraped and bruised, the skin broken in places, but miraculously not broken. Jed carefully drew the tiny creature out of the crevice and into the weak sunlight. She was a filly, even smaller than Comet, her coat a pale, dusty brown, almost blending into the earth. She trembled violently, exhausted and disoriented, but undeniably alive. Jed cradled her gently in his arms, stroking her tiny head, his rough hands surprisingly tender. She was so fragile, so vulnerable, a mere wisp of life against his strong frame. He looked down at Comet, who had moved closer now, his soft muzzle nudging the filly's side tentatively, a gesture of gentle inquiry, of nascent kinship. The connection between them was palpable, an unspoken understanding forged in shared danger and the miracle of rescue. It was a moment of profound peace and quiet triumph on the stark, wind-swept ridge. Jed felt a lump form in his throat, a mixture of overwhelming relief and an equally profound sense of gratitude for the resilience of life, for the unexpected acts of bravery that could bloom in the harshest of environments. Jed carefully scooped up the rescued filly. She was incredibly light, almost ethereal in his arms, a stark contrast to the solid, sturdy build of Comet. He could feel her heart beating rapidly against his chest, a tiny drumbeat of survival. He looked at Comet, who stood watching, his large dark eyes full of a gentle curiosity and a quiet sense of accomplishment. Jed knew that this was just the beginning for these two remarkable animals. They had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, their paths crossing in a moment of desperate need, and now they were bound by a story Jed knew he would never forget. He would nurse the filly back to health, ensuring she was strong and safe, watching her grow and recover from her ordeal. And Comet, the foal who had run back to the same spot again and again, driven by an instinct greater than himself, would be hailed as the hero of the ranch. His courage, his determination, and his incredible, innate sense of empathy had saved a life. Jed began the slow, careful descent back down the ridge, the rescued filly nestled securely and protectively in his arms. Starlight walked close beside him, her whinnies now soft and contented, her gaze flicking between Jed and her brave son, a silent acknowledgement of their shared journey and the happy outcome. Comet trotted happily alongside his mother, occasionally nudging the filly in Jed's arms, as if checking on her well-being, a possessive, protective gesture. The wind seemed to have softened its howl. The sun's rays felt warmer, more gentle on their skin. The stark landscape no longer felt desolate or unforgiving, but like a sacred place, a place where an extraordinary act of compassion and bravery had unfolded, forever imprinting its significance upon the land. Jed looked down at the tiny filly, then up at Comet, his heart full to bursting. He had set out to find a lost foal, a task that had consumed his every waking thought, but he had found so much more. He had found proof of an extraordinary bond between creatures, of courage found in the smallest of frames, and of the deep, mysterious connections that nature weaves, often in ways we can barely comprehend. Jed knew that the ranch, his home, was more than just land and livestock. It was a sanctuary where such profound stories of life, resilience, and connection could unfold. A place where even the smallest among them could teach the greatest lessons. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the ranch, Jed watched Comet, who had settled down beside his mother for the night. The little foal, once lost and feared gone forever, had returned not just to safety, but with a story of bravery that would be told for years to come. He had faced the unknown, endured hardship, and ultimately he had led the way to a rescue. Jed smiled, a deep sense of contentment settling over him. The ranch was a little brighter, a little more hopeful, because of the little foal who kept running to the same spot, driven by a heart far bigger than his small frame. He had shown them all what true courage looked like. What an incredible testament to the power of instinct and compassion. If this story moved you, please give it a like and share it with someone who needs to hear about the bravery of a little foal. Subscribe for more heartwarming tales from the ranch.